We just want to start by welcoming everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Happy Thursday. This is Design Watch. This is our webinar bringing you topics of most value to you and your business. I am Sandy Cabellis, president of the ASID New Jersey chapter. We normally have topics that are about business, product specification, and subjects that are specific to our industry. But today we're doing something a little different, which I'm excited about. We're bringing you a topic that can really benefit everyone. In that regard, we thought it would be nice to extend the invitation to others in our community. Normally it's just designers, but I think this is such a great, we're so happy to have you today, Cara, and I think it's such a great topic that we're kind of reaching out to everyone. So if you are here today as a guest, we welcome you. If you're not familiar with the American Society of Interior Designers, we are the largest professional organization of interior designers, and we believe that design impacts lives. So through collaboration and education, ASID strives to demonstrate and celebrate the power of design to positively change people's lives. So kind of similar to what our guest is here to talk about, making positively changing people's lives. So great segue, right? So I'm welcoming Cara Maximo of Maximize. We're talking about maximizing wellness, counseling, and coaching. The topic is stress of this storm, wellness, awareness, and mental management. Just a little bit about Cara. She has a BA in psychology from Rutgers, 1994, and MSW from Columbia. You are a licensed clinical social worker, and your business is based in Chatham, New Jersey. So that's just a little bit. Cara, I hope you're going to tell us a little bit more about yourself. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here. And at this point, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, and welcome everyone. I love to be as interactive as possible, and I know you guys can't put your cameras on or have a conversation, but you can always type stuff into the chat, and then Sandy can bring those questions up or thoughts so we can have as much of an interaction as possible. I am going to share my screen now with a slide deck on reduce stress and build resiliency. And just to give you a little bit also of background, so again, I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I'm based out of Chatham, New Jersey. I work with adults and older teens, mostly adults, with issues around anxiety, stress, physical illnesses that cause some anxiety, stress, and depression, and trauma history. So like I said, I'm a licensed therapist. I am working mostly telehealth. So most of my sessions are just like this on video. Although now with COVID, I'm just starting to bring people back into the office slowly as appropriate. And yeah, so that's basically a little bit about my story. And I'm really glad to be here because this has been a really difficult time. Every industry, every business has changed. Some have changed differently than others, but everyone has been through a lot of change, something we've never seen in any of our lifetimes before. So going through some skills based in mindfulness, cognitive behavioral therapy, and some therapy tools can help us to reduce our stress and build resiliency. So hopefully you walk away with some takeaways that you can use in your daily life. I know for me, I saw when COVID first hit, I saw a decrease in the people coming in because of fear, not necessarily having a place at home to do telehealth. But as time went on, a lot of people who were scrambling to quarantine and do what they needed to do early on are now feeling the effects of being isolated from peers, being not able to work as much or not being able to work the same way. And a lot of the stress is starting to hit people a little bit now. So it's great that your organization wanted to bring some stress reduction and resiliency building to your organization. So I want to start with just defining stress a little bit. So 43% of all adults who suffer adverse health effects from stress. So stress affects us in a lot of different ways. And when we're in a situation where there's so much uncertainty, which we are right now, it increases a lot of our stress levels. 75 to 90% of all physician visits are for stress-related ailments and complaints. We don't always realize it, but so much of what's happening to us physically is coming from how we manage the world around us and how we deal with our stress. It's linked to the 6 leading causes of death: heart disease, cancer, lung ailments, accidents, cirrhosis of the liver, and suicide. Those are the leading causes of death, and they all are linked to stress. And 62% of people rank money as the highest cause of stress. So when it comes to being a business group, and right now with changes to everybody's ability to run their businesses, it can be really difficult in this particular environment. And it can be adding a lot more complications and stressors into your day. So some of the ways that stress manifests, so emotionally, we will often find ourselves feeling anxious, feeling nervous. We feel it from an emotional perspective. We feel it from a physical perspective, from a cognitive perspective. Sometimes our thinking can be affected. So we start to find ourselves getting easily confused, like our mind. We can find ourselves forgetting things. I don't know how many people here have found themselves when they're in a really tough situation, they can't do the simple tasks that they used to be able to do because our mind doesn't function as well when we're under a lot of stress. Our bodies are affected. We're aches and pains, cardiovascular issues, right? When we're under a lot of stress, our body goes into the fight or flight mode, and that starts reducing chemicals and hormones that increase our blood pressure, cause us to have tension in our muscles. And then in our behavior, we can be forgetful. We may be turning to alcohol. We may be using other ways to cope, and our behaviors might also become problematic. Anybody here that can relate to any of this, or any examples, or any thoughts of how stress has affected them on different levels? So let's talk about what's actually happening. So here's a picture of a house on fire. You may think, well, that's really odd. Why is a house on fire? Think about how your house works. You have a fire alarm, most of us. When the house is on fire, fire alarm goes off, right? That's what normally happens. But how many of you, like me, who when you cook or you burn something in the toaster, smoke sets off the fire alarm? My fire alarm still sounds just like it would sound if there was a fire or whether I was burning something. It doesn't know the difference. So if we think about the way our mind works and our brain works, I'm going to use my hand. For those of that you can see me, hopefully you can all see me. This is like our brain, the way our brain functions. So if you look at this as, this is your spinal cord and your brain stem. This in here, in the center part of your brain, is your reptile part of the brain. Right down in here, your brain stem, that's your instinct, your reptilian brain. Then in the middle here is your limbic system, where you're fight and flight, and something called the amygdala. The amygdala is your fire alarm. So when we find ourselves nervous or anxious or worried and we're in danger, our amygdala fires. This right here is your thinking part of your brain. This is your prefrontal cortex. This is where we use ration, reason, logic, thinking. When our fire alarm goes off, our prefrontal cortex and our amygdala, they disconnect. Because if you're running from a saber-toothed tiger, the last thing you want to do is think, is it a friendly tiger? Is it not a friendly tiger? No, you just want to run. So our brains are designed that when our fire alarm goes off, we disconnect and we can't think clearly. The problem is sometimes our fire alarm goes off when we're burning toast and it's not a real fire. So then we can't think straight when there isn't a need, and we actually need our prefrontal cortex engaged. And our fire alarm sets off a whole cascade of events that go on in our bodies, right? We start to get more cortisol levels and all kinds of negative effects to stress. So like I said before, if we're thinking about from an evolutionary perspective, our minds and our brains are designed to work in such a way that we need to be anticipating any possible danger that could come our way. So in order to anticipate danger, our fire alarm needs to be ready to fire, and our thinking brain needs to disconnect. So what does that mean? We go into this mode of fight, flight, and freeze. So inside of our brain, our fire alarm goes off, we stop thinking, and we go into fight, flight, or freeze. But that fire alarm is going to go off not just when we're in danger, but it also can go off when we're thinking about danger, when we have an anticipation of danger, when we're worried about something that may or may not be true or real, just like me burning eggs on the stove, right? So our amygdala is looking to protect us. So in order to protect us, we kind of tend to go towards the negative. We go to the worst case scenario is our go-to. We tend to think more negative than more positive because we're trying to self-protect and survival mode. Any questions or thoughts so far on kind of what's happening and how this is working?
If anybody, don't forget, if you have any questions, Cara was willing to answer any questions that you have. You can just type them into the Q&A feature on Zoom. And if not, we can keep rolling.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll keep going. So this kind of explains a little bit of what's happening. And we talked a little bit before about how we have a lot of physical ailments that come along with our stress levels. And a lot of those physical issues come up because of the fight, flight, and freeze response. That's our nervous system and our limbic system that kicks in. And it kicks in when we're anticipating danger. Whether that danger is perceived or real or just perceived, it still sets off the same chain of events. The amygdala still fires and we still find ourselves in fight, flight, or freeze mode. So in order to differentiate whether it's a real fire or whether it's a real something to be worried about or just a thought, we need to engage our prefrontal cortex. And that's hard to do when our amygdala is firing so much. So we want to be aware of what's happening in our brains. So the first step is to look closer at what we're thinking, because our amygdala starts to fire not just with what's happening around us, right? There's something called neuroception where your nervous system or limbic system picks up on danger cues that you're not even aware of that then starts to react. So you might find yourself having your amygdala start to fire and your fire alarm start to go off based on something that you're not even 100% aware of, but also could be just your fears or thoughts, things that come up in your mind. So for example, let's start with an event. If you have an event that happens, so I'm going to use something like something really simple, like you're out for a walk in your neighborhood. You see someone you know. You walk towards them and wave, and that person walks away. How do you feel when that happens? How many people would feel hurt, rejected, sad, maybe even angry? Right? Because the person walked away. Because what's happening is the event is you wave at the person, you smile, they don't respond. So the thought that a lot of us have would be, they don't like me. I did something to offend them. What did I do to her? Right? What did I do to him? I can't believe they just blew me off. Right? We have all these thoughts about the event. And we have a feeling. We feel rejected. We feel hurt. We feel put off. And then maybe next time we see that person, next time we go out for a walk and we see that person, maybe we won't say hello. Maybe we'll give them the cold shoulder. Maybe we are going to act in such a way that we don't acknowledge them because of how we felt. But what if we go back through those events and say, okay, I walk up, I see someone I know, I smile and I wave, and they don't wave back. What if I think to myself, well, I'm wearing a mask. They don't recognize me. Or maybe they're on their phone. Maybe they have AirPods in and they're having an important conversation. Maybe they were just so lost in their own thought that they didn't even see me wave. Plus, I'm wearing a mask. Not only did they not recognize me, maybe they didn't see me smile. Maybe they didn't see my arm go up to wave and they just didn't know I was talking to them. Maybe they thought I was waving at someone else. All of those thoughts, our emotional response or our feeling is going to be a little bit more neutral. It's going to be a little bit more benign. And then next time you see that person, you might reach out and say something kind or thoughtful or, hey, I saw you the other day. How are you doing? You wouldn't give them the cold shoulder. So when you think about this situation, it's a really simple example, but how many times do we go about our day when events happen and we have a really strong feeling and an action, but what was the thought that we were having? What was going on in our mind prior to how we felt? And that's really what dictates our thoughts, much more than the actual event itself. So, I put this picture up because this is a great way to explain what's happening in our brain. When we have an event and we have a thought about it, just like, see how these pathways are formed in the grass of a field? That's what's happening in our brain. There are neural pathways that get triggered and neurons that fire in our mind, in our brain, that become like the worn down grass. And the more we have the same thought, the stronger it gets. So the thought, I'm not good enough. This won't get better. I can't do this. I'm not okay. I mean, I just had a client who I usually do a video with, and she wouldn't video because she says, I hate looking at myself on camera. You know, it's the thought that I'm not enough, right? I can't do this. All those negative thoughts get formed in our minds, just like the way the grass is beaten down on this pathway, and they become automatic. We don't even have to realize we're going there. And when an event happens, the thought is triggered right away. The key here is to say, I don't have to keep it this way. I can choose a different path. I can notice when I'm having these thoughts, when I'm feeling a certain way, and say to myself, what really am I thinking right now? Challenge that thought and create a new neural pathway. Because if we create a new neural pathway, suppose we started walking this way across the grass, a different way, eventually the grass would regrow in that pathway and a new one would form, but it takes conscious effort and practice and repetition. So that's something to keep in mind when you're looking at your thoughts, when you're noticing what's happening and noticing how you're feeling. Ask yourself, well, what was I really thinking? And is that true? Is it valid? And am I creating an automatic thought that's just buying into something that's really not true? Any questions on this idea?
We do have some questions that came up, if I can. Okay, so Susan was asking, is it more typical for women than men to have a thought process like the first one you described, as opposed to the second way of looking at it?
I don't know if it's necessarily more for women than men, but it's a lot of how we're socialized. So a lot of times women are socialized to be more caregivers, to take care of other people, right? We're socialized to be kind. So we tend to blame ourselves more. So there's a lot of negative self-talk that I do see with women, but honestly, I see it with men too. They just don't talk about it so much. I think that's the key, right? If a lot of times women are socialized to blame themselves, men may also blame themselves, but they're not allowed to express their feelings, depending on how you're socialized, right? Depending on kind of how your parents raised you, those like norms between men and women. But this process tends to happen with both men and women. We all have an interpretation of events that fit a narrative based on signals that we've gotten throughout our life that become like those neural pathways. They become ingrained in us. So for example, if you were really good at math as a kid and you were told you're really good at math, but you're terrible at science, right? You might, every time something happens that requires science, you might think, well, I'm terrible at science. And it becomes so ingrained that it may not be true that you're terrible at science. It may be that you could actually do really well in a science class, but that thought just comes up over and over and over again. And that's what you kind of base everything around, that core belief about yourself. And it becomes very ingrained in your mind. So you have to be able to notice that thought, notice how you feel, and then ask yourself, what's a new way of looking at this? Is this necessarily true? So hope that answers the question.
That's great. And another question came up earlier, but I'm not sure if we'll understand the context. What do you mean by freeze? Maybe should we ask Nancy her question, or do you know what she's referring to?
Yeah. So fight, flight, freeze. So we used to think, that we had, and you said Nancy asked the question. So Nancy, just type in if I'm not going in the right direction. But we used to think that our nervous system had two states, either the sympathetic nervous system kicks in where you fight and flight, right? The nervous, the anxious, the sweating, or we were kind of feeling comfortable and safe. But we now know that we have, it's called the polyvagal theory. We have three different, our nervous system has three different states that we could physically be in. And it has to do with the vagus nerve that runs through our body. And so the vagus nerve runs from like through the head, down the spine, and down to your gut. When we're feeling safe, when we're feeling secure, when someone smiles at us, or maybe a newborn baby is being held by their mom for the first time, our emotional state, our nervous system is in a state of calm, a state of security, a state of safety. That's where we want to be we would like to be most of the time. When we have a sense of danger, we get into this fight or flight, which is like ramped up, ready to run, right? Trying to run from that saber-toothed tiger, ready to kind of escape. And that's when we trigger that fight and flight in the sympathetic nervous system. Freeze is more of our reptilian brain, like our reptilian brain, when when you see an animal that's playing dead, right? And you kind of just completely freezes. And that happens to us in in our limbic system as well. So our nervous system actually can go into freeze mode where we feel like we're immobilized. So when you hear about a situation about maybe somebody who was in a horrible accident or a horrific trauma, or, a situation where they were attacked and they can't move, they're like, I know I should have moved, I know I should have run, but I just couldn't run. We go into this freeze mode, which is a very early core response, developmental response, not developmental, but protective response to feeling like our life is in danger, where we freeze, like play dead. And so for somebody with maybe chronic depression, their emotional system might be in the limbic system, or their nervous system might be in the freeze mode where they're immobilized and feel stuck, can't get out of bed in the morning, can't really do anything. And even though there's a part of their thinking brain that knows that this is not where I want to be, I'm feeling completely stuck and frozen. So does that answer the question?
Let's, you know what, if that didn't answer, Nancy, maybe you can type us again. And Cara, if you want to keep going, we can circle if we need to.
Okay. So now we know that the way our brain works. So what we want to do is then say, okay, so what can we do about it? So one of the things is to know your triggers, right? What are the things that tend to trigger you? So somebody who has a specific type of fear or a specific core belief about themselves, and there's certain situations where they tend to be more upset or more triggered than others. If you know your triggers, you're more likely to be able to do something about it. Like, what are the warning signs physically and emotionally? All right. If every time your mother-in-law says something to you and you start to feel like your tenseness in your shoulders, and you know you're feeling that physical, or you're feeling like attacked, that's a physical and emotional warning sign. Can you notice that warning sign before it turns into the action, right? Before you like lash out or say something that you're going to regret. So really have an understanding of, for you, what are your triggers? What are your warning signs? And what does that look like? And then try to notice, once you know what your warning signs are and also recognize your thoughts, you want to try to diffuse those thoughts and reframe them. So the first one, it says, say, I'm thinking. So if the thought is, I am terrible at this, I'm going to totally bomb it, and I'm doing awful, right? If that's a thought that goes through my head right now, I'm terrible at this, I can't do this. How does it feels terrible, right? Think about a thought that you say to yourself, like, I'm not good enough. I want you right now, while you're sitting here, and nobody has to share, but if you think to yourself, I'm something negative that you tend to automatically say to yourself a lot, and just notice what that feels like. Notice if you can feel it in your body. Can you feel it? Like, what does it feel like to have that thought? And then I want you to now say it again, but put the words I'm thinking in front of it. In fact, even more so, say, I'm noticing I'm thinking I'm terrible at this. When you say I'm noticing I'm thinking, does it feel different? It creates a little bit of a separation between the thought you're having and who you are. It's no longer like I am terrible. It's I'm noticing I'm thinking I'm terrible, but that's just a thought. That doesn't make it true. It doesn't make it real. It kind of disconnects me from the actual thought. Another way is to label the thought. That might be a label like, oh, I'm just catastrophizing something, or that's just black and white thinking, right? When we label it, we're actually engaging our prefrontal cortex. So if we start to have a negative thought and we're able to label it and say, oh, that's just an over-exaggeration, or I'm just mind reading. He didn't really think that about me. I'm just mind reading. That label engages our prefrontal cortex. And when we engage the prefrontal cortex, we're actually reducing the alarm on the fire alarm, because they can't both operate at the same time. So they say kind of to name it, to tame it. That's how you reduce the emotional reactivity when you're able to label it. Now, sometimes we're too far gone, but if we can catch ourselves with our triggers and put those labels to them, it can make a big difference. Then maybe ask yourself, what's a new way to look at the situation, right? Examine the evidence, right? So in the situation where you're walking down the street and someone doesn't say hello, well, examine the evidence. You know, they were looking past me. So it's possible that they didn't even hear me. Oh yeah, I noticed I saw earbuds in their ear. Maybe they were listening to loud music or having a phone conversation, right? Looking at the evidence that supports or doesn't support the thought. And more often than not, a lot of those negative thoughts that we have that cause us an emotional response, if they aren't true, if we really look objectively at the evidence, we could see that it's not true. But our mind automatically wants to go to the worst case scenario. So that's our first thought. Another way is to ask yourself, is something possible versus probable? Just because something's possible doesn't make it probable, right? I used to joke with people, I'm in Chatham, New Jersey, and there's not a very big bear population, but every once in a while we see like a bear, like in somebody's backyard. So I say, you know, it's possible a bear could walk right past the window of my office right now, but it's not probable. It's not likely. It's not impossible, but it's not likely. So check in with yourself and ask yourself, am I focusing on something that's just because it's possible, or is it really probable? And do I need to put my energy there? And then the last one is it personal, pervasive, or permanent? These 3 P's can make a huge difference. We often personalize things that aren't personal, right? With this situation with walking down the street and waving, it probably had nothing to do with us why they didn't wave, but we took it personally because that's our go-to. Pervasive means if one thing goes wrong, everything's going wrong, right? We overgeneralize, but that's not necessarily true. And permanent is, you know, this is never going to change. The one thing we know about life is constantly changing and moving. And so nothing is really permanent. But when you're in the middle of something stressful, it feels permanent. So just to check in with yourself, is this really permanent? Can I get through this? You know, especially with what's going now. I mean, the whole mask wearing and COVID, and I don't know how many of you are moms. I'm a mom with a middle school and high school sports, and it's been devastating, the sports situation. And then thinking about colleges and exams and all this stuff, it feels like it's going to be permanent. And even at worst case scenario, if this situation lasts longer than we want it to last, it's still not permanent, right? It's still not forever, right? It's so being able to recognize that we will get through it. Another thing to keep in mind is self-care. Diet, exercise, sleep, self-care. We sometimes don't realize how much of an impact our physical health has on our emotional health. When we're eating healthy and we're taking care of ourselves, the message that goes to our body is that things are good and it keeps moving along. But if all of a sudden we're hungry and we're tired, we're not getting sleep, we're not taking care of our bodies, the message that goes to the brain is, uh-oh, something's wrong in my environment. I need to be extra diligent looking for that saber-toothed tiger that can come out of the bushes to come get me. Right? Because we have this negativity bias where we're trying to protect ourselves at all times. So we are more likely to worry about what could go wrong than what could go right. And when we're not taking care of our body, that gets amplified. So it's really important to keep in mind diet, exercise, and sleep. There's even some data that shows that experiments that were done where people were asked to remember positive words, neutral words, and negative words. And then they were asked to go to sleep, come back the next day, and then how many of the positive words can you remember? How many from the neutral list and how many from the negative list? And then they did that same experiment, but tell them to stay up most of the night, try to not get sleep. And then the next day, believe it or not, they were able to recognize most of the negative words, but not remember the positive words because our brain became much more negative when we didn't have sleep. Even with hunger, right? There's those commercials, right? That the hangry commercials, the Snickers, that you're cranky when you're hungry. There was a study done with parole officers and parole judges that showed, on average, about 60% of the time, judges granted parole in parole hearings, on average. When they looked at the hour before lunch, it was only 20% of the time. So that hour before lunch, when people were a little bit hungrier, they actually saw the world through a more negative lens and they were less likely to grant parole. So how we're taking care of our bodies and our self-care, our physical self-care, makes a huge difference in how we feel emotionally. Another thing to keep in mind that can be really helpful is just mindfulness and grounding. So we talked a little bit before about what happens in our brain, right? We have this saber-toothed tiger, right, is in the bushes, ready to come get us. And so our brain doesn't want to differentiate between, is it a nice tiger, is it not a nice tiger? It just wants to shut down our thinking. Our fire alarm needs to go off and we need to take action. So therefore, we tend to be a little bit more negative. Well, when we're practicing mindfulness, we're actually creating, so if you think about the way the brain works, is the prefrontal cortex is up top and the amygdala and the limbic system is down bottom. Most of us, when we find ourselves under stress, we're operating bottom up, meaning the fire alarm's in charge and our actions happen because it just happens, right? You tell yourself, I didn't mean to do that. I overreacted. I snapped. I yelled at that person, or I yelled at my kids, or I reacted in a way that I'm embarrassed by, because your brain is operating from the bottom up. that's when we get reactive. But when we practice meditation and we practice mindfulness and we practice paying attention on purpose in the present moment and focus and go through a mindfulness practice, we're actually strengthening the top down, which is what we want. We want to create that pause between stimulus and response. So if we're able to practice mindfulness and focus on our breathing, we're increasing the connectivity from top down. We want to be more top down. Top down means our prefrontal cortex is in charge and overrides our reptile brain, right? And our mammalian brain and our limbic system. Whereas if we're just reacting, it's the other way. So mindfulness exercises could be meditation. I have a list of some of my favorite apps that you can use to meditate, but also it could be just about doing something like adult coloring books, listening to music, gardening, anything where you're focusing your full attention in the present moment, non-judgmentally, and you're not worried about the future, you're not thinking about the past, you're being creative and you're working in the moment. That's also a way to build up that mindfulness. And I'm going to give you just a quick extra grounding exercise. A grounding exercise is a way to bring yourself, when you find yourself worried and ruminating or thinking about the future, worrying about the past, you want to bring yourself into the present moment. So if you practiced it right now, start by noticing 5 things around you can see. So right now in your environment, 5 things you can see. I can see my iced tea. I can see a tissue. I can see my phone. I can see my laptop. I can see my lamp. Now, 4 things I can touch. I can touch my speakers. I can touch my computer. I can touch my shirt. I can touch my jeans. 3 things I can hear. I can hear a little bit of the buzzing on the computer. I can hear the air conditioning system, and I can hear cars outside of my office. 2 things I can smell. I can smell my deodorant a little bit, or actually my shampoo. And I can smell the candle that was burning in my office a little while ago. And 1 thing I can taste. I can still taste my iced tea that I was drinking. So by going through this 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and bringing all my attention to my 5 senses, I'm grounding myself in the present moment. Another activity, and we're getting towards the end, but another activity I wanted to bring up, I call it Fill Your Bag Happy. I made it up. But it's based on positive psychology. And positive psychology has shown us, and studies from University of Pennsylvania have shown, that when we focus on what we're grateful for, we become happier. We become less depressed. Because we talked before about that saber-toothed tiger in the bushes about to eat us. Well, if we were a caveman and we were, or cavewoman, and we were walking around and we were in charge of finding, food, if we couldn't find the exact perfect blueberries, we would still live to see another day, right? We would find something else, right? It doesn't have to be perfect. So if we didn't remember where our favorite blueberries were growing, we'd be okay. But if we didn't remember what cave that saber-toothed tiger liked to hide in, or the bear liked to hide in, we would get eaten by something bigger, stronger, and faster. So from an evolutionary perspective, our minds need to hold on to that negative information that could save our lives. But it's not important, the positive information. So what does that mean? It means there's what's called a negativity bias. We all have it. And it's been studied on some people more than others, but on average, negativity bias is about 3 to 1. It takes 3 positive events or situations to have equal weight in our brains or our minds as 1 negative. One psychologist that used to say it's like our brains are Teflon for the positive and Velcro for the negative. So that being said, we talked before about the more negativity, the more our amygdala fires, the more a fire alarm goes off, the more emotional response we have. So in order to retrain our brain to focus more on the positive, we need to look for it. So if we're writing down the positive, like what we're grateful for every day, we start to see it. It's kind of like if you're all of a sudden wanting to buy a new car and you're like, I want a red Honda Civic. That's what I want. That's what I'm looking for. You go driving on the road. What do you see everywhere? Red Honda Civics. There weren't more red Honda Civics now than there were a year ago, but because you're thinking about them, you're seeing them. That's what happens with everything. Our minds act like a spam filter in our email. We can't possibly take in everything that happens around us all the time. So if you think about something, the signal says, I want to notice that. So I don't know for how many of you are parents. I remember when I was pregnant, I thought the whole world was pregnant. Everywhere I went, there were pregnant women. Everyone seemed to be pregnant when I was pregnant. Probably wasn't true. There were probably just as many pregnant women a year before, but I wasn't thinking about it. I wasn't noticing it because it wasn't on my radar. So if we want to try to improve our overall resiliency, improve our overall emotional response, we want to train our mind to see the good. And one way to do that is to write down what you're grateful for. So I like visuals. I created this Fill Your Bag Happy, which is at the end of every day, imagine all of the negativity that comes up and it fills in a bag. Empty that bag out and refill it using the letters of the word bag as best and brightest. What was the best and brightest part of my day? A, what did I accomplish today? Because we all accomplished something. So focus on my accomplishment. And G, what am I grateful for? So being able to identify the best accomplishment and grateful. And if you write it down or maybe text a friend what's in your bag every day. For parents, you can write down, do it with kids. When my kids were really little, this was a great bedtime routine to say, okay, what's in your bag today? And talk through our day to focus on the positive. Any questions or thoughts on that? Oh, right towards the end. It's a great journaling assignment to do, filling up your bag. So hopefully we kind of talked about why stress affects us so much, how it affects us, and then some just tools and tips and ways to manage that stress a little bit. Any thoughts or questions?
That's great, Cara. Yeah, if anyone has any questions, please just use the Q&A feature. You had some great analogies, by the way, while we're reading for questions. It really helps to remember how you're explaining it, like the smoke alarm and the worn down road. It's like, oh, okay, I get it. I can visualize that, when you give those good examples like that.
Yeah, I would assume you guys are all visual learners, right? Based on what you do, that right. The visual would be important. And I'm also a visual learner. I like having examples for sure.
Right, absolutely. Bring myself back so I can see you. Yeah, and you know what? It's funny because a lot of the things that you're talking about, we recognize so easily in children, right? We see a child who's crying and they're like, oh, they're in an awful mood. And you're like, what's wrong? And it's like, oh, it's past their bedtime. They're tired, right? But then you kind of forget I guess that's really what's happening to us as well. When you're saying when you're tired, your brain is more likely to accept the negative thoughts or have negative thoughts. And it's like, oh, I didn't know that happened to us as well. Mm-hmm. Right?
Absolutely. And it's hard to see it in ourselves. We're better off seeing things towards other people than ourselves, for sure.
Absolutely. We have just a comment from Nancy. Glad that you explained a lot of the actual brain functions. Yes, absolutely. Oh yeah, could you quickly review the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1? That was great. Could you go over that again?
Yeah. So it's 5 things you can see. So your visual, you want to focus on all 5 senses. So start with the biggest sense, right? Your eyes. You can see a lot more around you than anything else. So 5 things you can see, 4 things you can feel and touch, right? So you can only really touch what's in your proximity. 3 things that you can hear. So that might take a little while. Like right now, I just heard footsteps from the office above me. 2 things that you can smell and 1 thing you can taste. Another good grounding exercise that I like is just doing a body scan. I don't know how many people here have ever done body scans when you meditate, but a body scan is where you just start with one area of the body, either the top or your feet, and you just kind of take a few deep breaths, like belly breathing, big belly breathing. You want to make sure you can feel it in your abdomen. And as you breathe, focus all your attention, say, on your toes. Feel what your toes feel like inside your shoes. Feel the bottom of the soles of your feet and your ankles. And you just slowly move up your body part to notice what's happening physically as you sit and breathe. And that could be a good grounding exercise to bring you back into the present moment. And it could be done really quickly, even if it's just feel your feet inside your shoes. And deep breathing. I don't think we really covered a lot of the deep breathing. Imagine blowing out a candle. Like, this is how I explain it to kids. Take a deep breath, and then, so in through the nose, out through the mouth, like you're blowing out a candle. And you want to go slow so you don't hyperventilate. But we talked before about the polyvagal theory. You have the 3 different way of nervous system is in 3 different places. When you take a deep belly breath, you're actually activating the vagus nerve, and the ventral vagus interaction is causing the parasympathetic nervous system to kick in, which brings you into that safe, sound, secure place, which is, and can lower the actual fire alarm. So the deep breathing affects the vagus nerve, which goes right to the fire alarm to reduce that fire alarm. So then you can re-engage the thinking brain. That's why I say take a deep breath before you say anything, right? You want to stop, pause, breathe, and then move forward.
We had a comment. Yes, we had a comment. Yoga Nidra for body scanning. Is that a?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of different ways to do body scans. I have to say one of my favorite apps is Insight Timer, and Insight Timer has, you can put anything in the search button in that app, and it will. There's a lot of body scans. Progressive muscle relaxation is doing a body scan where you tense up and then loosen, and you kind of go through your body doing tense and loosen. That works really well with anxiety. But yeah, there's a lot of different types of meditation, yoga, body scans. There's so meditation is a form of mindfulness, but mindfulness doesn't have to be just meditation. Mindfulness could be taking a walk, focusing on just a grounding exercise, being in the present moment, doing art, doing something creative.
And let me ask you, I mean, I think these are great techniques for relaxation to deal with some anxiety. And if that's not working for someone, should they come see someone like you to give them specific tools, or what do you recommend?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes we all have some level of anxiety. We all have some level of changes in mood, and that's normal. If it becomes to the point where you feel like it's affecting your day-to-day, it's important to be able to say, hey, I need a little support. And a lot of people think like, oh, I don't need to go to a therapist. I can handle this on my own. But if you fell down and broke your leg and the bone was sticking out of your leg, would you not go to the hospital? Of course you would go to the hospital or a doctor, or you'd get it treated. Mental health is the same way. If you didn't do anything to cause this, this is not your fault. But we all have different moments where if our anxiety or feeling depressed or nervousness, or maybe a traumatic event, maybe some post-traumatic stress, something might be happening where we need support. It's important to be able to do that. And I find that Psychology Today is a great website. So literally just Google psychologytoday.com. You can put in your zip code and find a therapist that way. You can call your insurance company or just Google to look for therapists. It can be really helpful to talk to somebody. And there's different types of therapy, right? I do talk therapy, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, and acceptance and commitment therapy, which is, we talked a little with the thinking bubbles. That's part of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. But I also do like some mindfulness, some trauma work. There's something called brain spotting, which I do, which is a trauma treatment, which kind of gets at the limbic system more in our brain and bypasses the prefrontal cortex in order to deal with things that are not necessarily in our conscious awareness, but affecting us on a day-to-day basis. So there's a lot of different types of therapy. It's worth talking to someone to see if it'd be right for you.
That's great. Okay. Great information. Really, I think we can all benefit from the things that you're teaching us today. So I don't see any more. Oh, I just spoke too soon. That's nice. Thank you, David. A comment. I thought this was very well done. Thank you for making this event happen. Thank you to Cara for doing this for us, because this is great. I mean, even if we think that we're okay and managing, you've given us so many great tools that we can take away, some specific tools. And I think that's really, really most helpful. So
thank you. And even with this whole COVID, I mean, I look at this as a collective trauma. And somebody once said, we're all in the same boat. I don't even see it that way. I think we're all in the same storm. We all have different boats. Somebody's boat might be a yacht, and somebody's boat might be like have a hole in the bottom and they're struggling. And you just don't know. So, but we're all experiencing something. This is huge. And I'm seeing a lot of people who are now being affected now, because like with any traumatic event, it usually hits later, right? It's not at the time. And I'm starting to see people, the isolation, the working from home, the loss of a job, loss of people who've known people who've passed away, people who've gotten sick. I have a few people that have gotten sick and recovered, but are having a lot of neurological and anxiety symptoms related to post-traumatic from being sick and how sick they were. And there's just so much that's hitting later, that just to understand that nobody caused this. And and cut yourself some slack and be kind to yourself and know that it's okay to ask for help if you need it.
Yeah, that's great. No, that's a great point. And I'm happy that you still have your screen share up here that has all of your contact information. So we have your phone number, we have your email address. Thank you so much for sharing all that, and your website. So I hope everybody will be taking that down and giving Cara a call if you need her. So I guess, well, let me see. I keep wanting to wrap up, but oh no, we have a thanks so much and a great information. Thanks for hosting. Yes, I couldn't agree more. So I think we'll wrap it up at this point. So Cara, thank you so much for being with us today. This was amazing, really amazing, so helpful. I took a lot of notes. You gave us a lot of great things to work on. And thanks for everybody for joining us today. And thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody have a great afternoon, and we'll see you again next week.
Thanks. Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye, everybody.